Remember, this isn't a game.
Happy New Year, Gothamites. Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City. And now somewhere in upstate New York, she's Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Happy New Year.
Happy 2024.
Yeah.
We made it.
Yeah. Did you have some happy holidays leading up to our viewing of Captive Hearts?
Not at all. I was under the weather most of the holiday break, so
Yes,
I'm feeling good now, and I'm actually excited for the year.
Very cool.
How about you?
You know, you were under the weather, so the holidays were not as happy. Maybe, that's my fault.
How is it your fault?
Because I tempted fate by saying I was excited about December, and I generally enjoy the holiday season. And then it all came crashing down. I will say 2023 was an amazing year for me. I know it wasn't for a lot of people, but it was an amazing year for me personally. And I feel like you and I got to do a lot of stuff that we don't normally get to do. And we had some amazing shows last year. But I thought 2023 was a pretty fantastic year. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can do this year.
Same. We have almost a full second half of the season of the first season of X-Men animated series. So we have quite a few episodes to cover. And then after that, we're not going to launch into the second season of X-Men. We're probably going to pivot and then go to something else. But if our listeners want us to continue on in the series, we can certainly return to it.
Yeah. We always give our patrons an opportunity to vote on what we're going to cover next. So you can always go to patreon.com/Arkham Sessions. The $3 tier will get you the opportunity to vote for what we cover next. I highly recommend you pay us a visit, especially as we get closer to the end of this first season. And it's getting there. And it's ramping up pretty dramatically, I think. Before we get into Captive Hearts, we got an excellent SpeakPipe message from a listener that I would like to play for everyone. So let's listen to that now.
Hello, Dr. Drea and Brian. I'm a longtime listener of the Arkham Sessions, and your show has gotten me through some really tough times. Especially during the pandemic when I was largely bedbound for 2 years as a result of the complications of surviving 3 strokes. And I've always seen Batman as an aspirational figure, and I've always really found a lot in the character, the same way that y'all do. And I especially enjoyed your Doom Patrol episodes being disabled myself. I just wanted to quickly comment, coming live to you from Kamala, Uganda, and just wanted to say that I appreciate you for the work that you do on your podcast, and wanted to quickly comment on your Merry Little Batman episode. You said that there was no mention of the rest of the Bat family, but there actually was a quick little Easter egg when Bruce is showing Damian the list of people who he can contact. Nightwing is actually on that list, and I read online on an article that Merry Little Batman is actually going to be a segue onto a Bat Family show on Amazon Prime. So exciting news ahead.
Well, thanks, Mugabe, for listening to our show. It's honestly, it's really meaningful to hear from listeners and to learn a little bit about their lived experience and their personal histories, and to bring that into why they listen to this show.
And listeners from around the world. We are international.
Yeah. Yes. So thank you so much for that message. Stay tuned, keep listening, and we hope we continue to inspire you and be a part of your life. So thanks so much for that.
And just as a reminder to folks, if they want to send us messages, whether it's complimentary or critical, or maybe you've got a question or a suggestion, where can they find us?
They can find the Speak Pipe button right on my website, drdreapsychology.com. You'll find the button at the very top of the website. You can just click on that. I've been saying that people have 2 full minutes to leave a message, but a listener of ours actually corrected me and said it's more like 90 seconds.
Yeah.
So you can send us a couple messages if there's a deep dive that you want to take and you need a little bit more time than a minute and a half. But yes, please, if you'd like to send us a message, we listen to all of our messages. Of course, we are not able to air all of our messages on the show, but we do listen to all of our messages and we'd love to hear from you. So go ahead and use the Speak Pipe button on my website, drdreapsychology.com.
Excellent. Let's get into this episode, Drea.
Oh boy.
Like all episodes, it continues from the last. And in that last episode, Wolverine took an injury from his battle with Sabretooth. And he was bedridden, despite the fact that he has a pretty significant quick healing factor. He was down and out for a minute, which I think just shows how deadly Sabretooth is.
Yeah. They're definitely a match.
Yeah.
They can tear each other up. He isn't really in a lot of the episode, at least in the beginning, because of his injury. But what I had actually some reactions because I'm still a little resentful about Professor X. I'm not going to lie. I'm starting to develop some, I don't know, feelings about the way that his leadership style is. Mm-hmm. So I was relieved to also learn that he's not in this episode as much either. He does, I have to say, he makes a few comments in the very beginning of this episode. The X-Men are training in the war room, and these are
It's the danger room.
I'm sorry, the danger room. I'm mixing up my simulated training rooms. They're in the danger room, and it's the top-notch soldiers. These are the everyone else is injured, or Jubilee is still new. So we have Storm, we have Cyclops, we have Jean Grey, we have our top X-Men candidates here doing their training, and Professor X is in that little window overseeing. I didn't realize that the danger room had this observing window, much like a surgery room or something, where people can watch all the action. And he's giving them guidance, and he's overseeing this training. And my understanding is that he's designed the simulation. So a couple things came up for me as I was watching this, and there's all sorts of dangers that are happening. There's all sorts of threats, sensory threats, environmental threats. At one point, the room starts to collapse in on itself, which we definitely will talk about because Storm has this reaction to it. And there's one moment where Professor X says, "Remember what happened to Morph?" And I'm reacting in a way that why would you, there you go again, weaponizing trauma, or getting it kind of twisted here, almost setting in this idea or concept that loss is the individual failures of these trainees. And I don't know do you know what I mean? I'm trying to articulate the sense of the death of Morph is somehow
a marker of failure.
Yeah, it's reconceptualized as well, if you train better, if you were better soldiers, you wouldn't have lost him. And I think that is very blaming. And I also feel especially since Morph didn't make a mistake. He sacrificed himself. He threw himself in front of the blast.
But I didn't take this as a mile marker for failure. I took this as, remember, this is for real out there.
Yeah.
And you're only as good out there as you are in here.
You're right.
And so it's that sort of...
He phrases it also in the context of reminding the X-Men how much humans fear them.
Yeah.
And so there is that explanation our enemies are scared of us and they're very threatened by us, and remember that they can kill us. But from what I recall, Morph was killed by a Sentinel, not a human.
That is correct. And what I do like about this show is that it has those layers where, very similar to this episode, where you've got the up tops and the down belows, where everyone thinks they're trod upon because they're mutants. We're treated so unfairly, but they don't know the half of it. There's an entire subsection of people who cannot pass as human and are therefore treated even worse. And we've seen that with Sabretooth. We saw in his memories that Xavier invaded, that he was treated particularly poorly because of his beast-like qualities. And then the one beast-like character on the X-Men, Beast, is currently in prison. And you might suggest that he's really only in prison because of how he looks. He's not, if he looked like Scott, as you brought up in a previous episode, if he was dressed dapperly and had the chiseled good looks of Scott Summers, Beast might not be in that jail cell right now, making a martyr of himself, but really just sort of
really sacrificing for the group.
Yeah, he's becoming the poster child for mutant mistreatment. Meanwhile, the other people, unless something accidentally happens or one of them gets angry and claws pop out or optic blasts are fired out of his eyes by accident, no one would necessarily know that any of these people are mutants. And now you've got this entire other group of people who cannot hide who they are, no matter how much they try. I want to go back very quickly, though, to Xavier. And
do we have to?
Well, it's less about Xavier and it's more about Discord. So we had a listener on Discord, Trevor, comment on that Magneto Wolverine interaction. And I thought it appropriate. I mean, he apologizes for being late to the discussion. I don't think so at all. I think this is exactly when we need to talk about it. Trevor says, so when it came to how Wolverine and Professor X responded to the threat of Magneto and having Sabretooth at the mansion, I believe in that scenario that Professor X treated Sabretooth differently because Sabretooth was not given a chance to contemplate Xavier's methods yet. He wanted to see if he could sway him onto his side like he had done with other mutants before, albeit his methods could use a little work. Why he believed Magneto was a different case is because Magneto already heard Xavier out and disagreed. Xavier felt as though Magneto was a lost cause, as he had already had all the information and time to change and still disagreed. So he's really making the point that invading Sabretooth's mind wasn't as invasive as we might think. He was basically going in because that was the only way to communicate with Sabretooth and to get Sabretooth's buy-in to the therapy. The only problem with that is that the buy-in to the therapy was already happening as he was trying to get the buy-in.
Right.
So he was like, see what I can do? I can make you relive things. Like, trust me, just tell. That's the part that still gets me. Is that just tell me, I'm going to find out anyway.
Yeah, and it's sort of that mindset that he is absolutely confident that he can help Sabretooth through these methods.
Yeah.
The thing, too, that bothered me is that I wanted some acknowledgement from Professor X that what he was doing wasn't consensual and was very strong on pressure and power imbalance, and that wasn't ever coming up. So,
what Trevor continues by saying, that being said, I also wanted to point out that it feels to me that in all iterations of Professor X, he is never willing to contemplate himself being wrong from the start. He is just not open-minded and puts his ideas and methods at the forefront of his mind. I believe that he thinks of himself as always the smartest in the room, or maybe the strongest leader. It seems that every time he admits that he was wrong, it came after a realization or possibly a costly error. I could never see Charles Xavier saying the phrase, "I may be wrong about this," or some other variation. If he does agree with someone from the get-go, it is because they were already thinking in a similar way as he, and it's validation for his way of thinking. So,
And I agree with that. I think too, I'm trying to, I never thought I would say this, but I'm trying to put myself in Professor X's position with some understanding around what it must be like to be him. So I'm trying to use my empathy.
You mean so superior?
Well, yes, in that, imagine that you had the ability to not just enter every single person's mind, but fully comprehend. He's not just a witness to the thoughts, cognitions, and feelings that other people experience. There's a deeper understanding of other people's the processes, all of the different brain activities, thoughts, again, emotions, experiences, reactions. I almost feel like because he has these abilities, he is almost reaching a point where he understands firsthand. It's not true, but he has the experience of understanding firsthand what it must be like to be any one of these people. And he's done it presumably with hundreds of thousands of people and the majority of mutants that he encounters. And he must develop this idea that because he's done that, he knows all. He knows all the experiences. He knows all about their setbacks, their reactions, their responses, their fears, their doubts. And that does make him somewhat of an expert around the way the brain works, or the way the mind works. And so I don't blame him for feeling that he's confident he knows what these mechanisms are and how he can advance people's healing or influence or impact the way that they're perceiving the world.
Yeah.
And yet, while I can understand that, I also feel like, therefore, he must be a little bit more responsible with these powers. He has to think of this as stewardship. He has to think of this as not a set of powers over other people, but a set of powers or abilities that can be supportive of other people. So he kind of takes it to the next level. And in that regard, I'm just seeing how he's making all the wrong decisions around the assumptions he's making around his powers. Let's go back to the danger room for a moment, because while this is just a set of exercises for the trainees, there's a moment where Storm is in that simulated room collapse.
Yeah.
And she has a flashback. We actually see an image of the memory that she's having.
This is a continuation of something that we've already tapped into a little bit with that Inner Magneto episode, where she was clearly claustrophobic. She was upset that the ceiling was collapsing around her, similar to when she was a child.
So I'm wondering if you can play what she tells the team after that happens, because she has this really kind of visceral emotional reaction. She manages to get out of it, but then she says this to the team.
Indeed. Here we go. Play it right here for you now.
I do not desire to lead, Professor. My claustrophobia puts the others at risk.
When the time comes, Storm, it may not be a matter of choice.
Implying that people who are claustrophobic can't be leaders, can't be good leaders,
Well, I would even pull back a little bit and wonder whether this is claustrophobia. So they use that word in the show because I think a lot of people understand what claustrophobia is. That's a clinical fear and a very powerful, anxious reaction to being in enclosed spaces.
Yeah.
And it's a very common one. actually.
Yeah.
Like fear of heights, fear of snakes and spiders, fear of
basically
enclosed
just
spaces.
small confined spaces. People start to feel trapped. They start to, in some cases, they might start to start breathing heavily and they're and sweating and
They can have a panic attack. Yeah, absolutely.
Their heart is palpitating. Yeah.
And the reason I say, so it's very common, but the reason I say I paused here is that this, in her mind, this might be claustrophobia, or maybe that's the way that she can explain to her peers what this is. But the flashback of this childhood memory gives us a lot of information about this. So I agree that, yes, this is claustrophobia, but a better diagnosis might be PTSD.
So are you suggesting that, well, let me be clear. You're not suggesting this, but I want to clarify. Trauma can't inform a phobia, or can't kick off a phobia that then lasts for the rest of your life. Or you're suggesting that the trauma, that the phobia is actually the trauma that you've not dealt with.
What I would say is that, yes, trauma can absolutely lead to a phobia or multiple phobias. But the reason I say that PTSD is a better explanation for her reaction and for the observable symptoms is that it's not just what's happening in closed spaces that's causing distress. Mm-hmm. It's the memory of the assault. Now, we don't exactly know yet what her flashback is all about, but I think what we understand is that this is some kind of interpersonal violence. This is man-made violence. This is some, environmental disaster, but that something or somebody caused that to happen. And then it led to this life or death moment.
As opposed to a naturally occurring her simply being in a tight space and realizing I am super uncomfortable and it stuck with her for the rest of her life.
Yeah, some people have experiences that are not necessarily traumatic, but that lend itself to developing a phobia. And sometimes phobias come out of nowhere. You don't necessarily have to have an explanation for the origins of the phobia. PTSD is such a unique diagnosis because it requires a critical event. It is like you have to be able to identify a situation where your life was in danger, or you were witnessing someone else's life in danger, in order to meet the criteria for PTSD. And we don't have all the information that we need, but what I was considering here is that if we're going to help Storm get herself out of these thoughts and be able to overcome the anxiousness, the distress, the panic that she encounters when she's in enclosed spaces, we have to take into account that flashback. We have to take into account that it's the memory of this trauma that's creating distress for her. And that has to be unpacked. That has to be addressed, processed in some way. And that's done differently than your kind of more average phobia. I don't want to downplay phobias. They can be incredibly uncomfortable and distressing, but you would address it differently. You would treat it differently. You would conceptualize it differently. And she goes on. So what's interesting is that she tells the team that she has this condition, and she's worried about how it will impact her leadership, her competencies in the field. And I like that about her. I like that about the writing, honestly. She's such a strong character, and she's such a formidable X-Men, and she's a main player on this team. And she's not impervious to emotional and psychological vulnerabilities, and she's just putting it right out there. So I really liked that about this little moment that they were having.
Let's now fast forward to the end of the episode, where she takes it upon herself to overcome her fear of tight places by going underground into the subways and not knowing where the walls are and are they closing in and all of that. There is a moment in which she could give up, but then she ends up actually saving the other members of the team. Would you say from a therapeutic standpoint, was this good for her PTSD and or her claustrophobia? Like, is this how you would overcome these fears, by standing up and embracing, not embracing, but going toe to toe with them?
Mm-hmm. I would say that it's case by case. There isn't a clear cut, singular indicated treatment for any single diagnosis, but for PTSD in particular, it's such a complex condition. It's like we talked about before on the show, it's impacted and influenced by various conditions and experiences. And, we need to be clear that Storm is not in a therapeutic relationship with a counselor. She's not, to our knowledge, she's not in treatment. She's not receiving some kind of trauma-informed or trauma-focused therapy for this. I don't know what Professor X is doing with I can't make the assumption, maybe there's something that he's doing with her.
Interesting. So wait, okay, there's so many things going through my head right now. Do we assume that she has denied therapy from Xavier?
I would love that. I would love the narrative if this were true, that he offers or tries to professionally force this mind probe.
Sabertooth it. If he sabertooths it.
He wants to sabertooth it. And she
and then she says,
declines.
"No, I'm not into that."
And she says, "Yeah, I'm not ready for that," or that's not the therapy that's going to help me, or that's not the intervention that I think is right for me. And I'm so glad you bring that up, because that I don't know, I want to call it self-efficiency or self-efficacy. Actually, I want to call it person-centered. She's given choices. She's given her voice. Part of this really is centered around consent and her as a client. I'm using quotes here. If she were a client, the ability to make informed choices and really be the expert of her own mental health. And the reason I say that is that we've had these really gross examples of where Professor X violates all those ethics and ideas. But later in the show, we really need to talk about the enemies in this episode, because they're brand new. Throughout the show, we see her make some decisions about whether she wants to be in the field in combat, based on what she knows about her well-being. And then at some point when she's going through the subway tunnels in order to get down to this location, is it Gambit who says, is she going to be okay? Does she need to be pulled out?
Yeah.
And it's Wolverine who says, she will let us know. And I really appreciate Wolverine's discernment and support and sense that we don't know what she needs, but we will be receptive to the point in time or the way that she expresses that she needs to be essentially pulled out of action. And I really liked that. That's the opposite of Professor X deciding that he knows best.
Could I ask you, while we obviously can't see the flip side of this, obviously Wolverine is taking this stance, and I think this isn't the first time he has been this insightful and this person-centered, as you said a moment ago. Do you think if Scott had been there in that moment, he would have also been this way? Or do you think that he would have been more of a disciple of Xavier, or maybe would have been equally supportive of her, but maybe taking more of Gambit's side? Like, Storm, why don't you stick back? we've got this. Like, could you see a alternate version of this episode where she stays back and then has to fly through the subways in order to help the friends, or whatever, if it weren't Wolverine saying she can come with us as far as she wants,
I am still trying to figure out Cyclops, because I do think the person he wants to impress the most is Professor X. And that's wrapped up in wanting to be a good leader.
Yeah.
And I don't know what he would do in that situation. I think he's less likely. So in some regard, I know Cyclops to really honor people's, dignity and to have respect for people and to not speak for people. I think that's an important quality. It's an important value for him. But I would see him making decisions for the team, even decisions that would take away their agency if it meant the good of the group.
Yeah.
And Wolverine's very different. Wolverine wants to respect her agency and sees her as someone who's totally capable, competent, powerful enough to make the decision when and if she needs to be pulled out of action. And I like that a lot about him. Now, it's to answer your question about whether this was the right choice clinically, I said it's complicated, but if a person is willing to, I used to work with service members and veterans quite a bit, and one of our goals is to return to combat or return to a deployment or to active service. And a lot of those conversations are built around what would it be like to be in action, and how would your phobia, PTSD, anxiety disorder, depression, how would that manifest in these situations again? And the person's own discernment, their own insight is very important in how to make those decisions. In rare situations, a clinician or doctor may say, my recommendation is to take time off or stay, out of the field until certain repair is done, because of the amount of distress that person could be in. And I could see Professor X being the person who would make that decision.
Yeah.
And yet in this case, things didn't reach that level.
So let's talk about the basic plot of the episode. This is a plot that's taken from the comic, although the person kidnapped was not Scott in the comic. A group of underground dwelling mutants called the Morlocks, obviously named after the Morlocks in the Time Machine. They kidnap Scott Summers with the intention of marrying him off to the leader of their group, Callisto, so that she can create offspring that will be a superior leader and, maybe not so dissimilar to like Magneto's plan. But this happens while on a date with Jean Grey, and we get to meet a number of these characters. Now, Callisto, I disagree, couldn't pass up top. She looks human. She just looks like sort of a punk human, wandering the streets of New York in maybe the 80s.
Well, we have to kind of, I think we have to unpack this team or this group of people a little bit. The Morlocks are self-proclaimed
Freaks.
Outsiders. Yeah.
They do say that they're outcasts. Yeah.
Yes. And so they have gathered, they've built a community. They are dwelling in the sewers. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, yes. In the
In
sewers.
the sewers?
Well,
I was going to say in the subway tunnels, but yeah, I guess there are sewers down there.
So this is, for those not aware, perhaps like yourself, this is not the only group of Morlocks.
What?
Necessarily. Like in the comics, there are subsects and there are groups that are hanging out in other areas. Like there's a Chicago faction. There's it is a sort of understood term for the groups that are living underground away from, normies.
Got it. Okay.
Because they're sort of freaks, but they're all sort of under the Morlock umbrella. Callisto,
Got it.
actually, her character, she doesn't go into this in the animated episode that we just saw, but her character actually was incredibly beautiful at one point and absolutely passed. I mean, she had the world at her feet, and then got injured, lost an eye, became, mangled, disfigured to some degree, and now only sees the ugliness within herself and realizes she doesn't fit in up top. And that might be why she's the leader. She's the closest one that could fit in up top, because, you see Leech, you see...
we got to go through some of these different characters because they are... they're really different. There's like Mud Guy, Sleep Lady, Solomon Grundy. There's a guy that's like basically Solomon Grundy because he sounds exactly like him. But some of them have amazing
Who is
powers.
Solomon Grundy?
He's like Sanders or Sunder.
Oh, Sunder.
Yeah.
You're just talking about the size, the behemoth.
But he
like
sounds
size
like him too.
I thought you were talking about like dead, like undead, like he is a undead sewn together character.
They're definitely misfits, and some of them have pretty amazing powers. Some of them have what I would call like
lame-o powers.
D level powers, like not.
And
not
some
great.
of them have really horrible names. I mean, luckily none of them, very few of them were actually mentioned by name in this episode, but I recognize most of the characters. There might be a handful in there that were sort of backgroundy characters. Most of them are characters from the X-Men, who, in some cases, a couple of them joined the X-Men. Sunder at one point, I remember a very famous X-Men cover with him on it. He was a member of the team. A couple of them joined X Factor. In fact, Leech is really important to my own memories of my time collecting X comics, because there was one special issue that involved the X Factor. It was an issue of X Factor, and it revolved around Christmas time.
Okay.
And there was one panel that, I kid you not, to this day, if I look at that panel, I would start crying probably.
Really?
And it's Leech understanding that there are kids, I don't want to say less privileged, but there were underprivileged children who weren't going to get toys for Christmas, and they actually drew like a tear coming down his face. And in the comics, he has a very particular way of speaking. And I just remember looking at that panel and I just started losing it. I'm like, I was having the same realization as Leech in that moment.
Yeah.
But so imagine imagine my own feelings when Leech reaches up and starts taking fruit from a fruit vendor on the street and starts to steal it and run away.
Can you maybe play the clip that I don't know if it's Leech or Callisto, how they describe who they are.
Yeah, I've got that. Here we go.
We Morlocks are outcasts, mutants too deformed and unsightly to pass for human on the surface world. Unlike you, we have no choice but to dwell here, away from those who fear us.
And this speaks again to the writing, and I know a lot of this is in the comics, and maybe it's a matter of really good consultation, really good research, and energy around bringing the narrative from the comics into an animated series. But what I appreciate about being introduced to this new group or this new community of mutants is that there's a divide. There's multiple divides, but there's a divide between the mutants who can pass, and I think, Jean Grey, Scott, even Storm to some degree can fall into that category.
I think to every degree. Storm doesn't really have any. I mean, the white eyes, maybe. But
and her outfits are very
but if
eccentric.
if you're talking about their outfits, none of them would pass. So, like Wolverine wearing a bright yellow costume with big, like none of them would pass. But if they're all just dressing out for a night on the town, I don't see anyone other than Beast having trouble
Yeah,
passing.
you're right. The majority of the X-Men are able to pass.
Yeah.
And that's a good clarification, because even in passing, there are things you can do to accentuate your kind of majority features, your features that fit in, and background your features or qualities or characteristics that don't fit in. And you're naming characteristics and actual characters who can kind of like work with that and use those abilities to navigate their social world. The Morlocks are clear and about what they're not able to do in the social world, even if they walked and talked like non-mutants. Some of their features are simply absolute, they are immutable. And that is,
I think of like, so one of the characters that we saw, and we only saw him briefly use any of his powers, would be like, for instance, Glowworm, who was the almost Gorgon-esque. He was a worm. He's a worm character.
Okay.
And what's crazy is his mutant ability has nothing to do with being a worm. Like,
that's so unfortunate.
He's almost Gambit. Like he has the ability to take in energy, like just about any kind of power or energy, and he's able to transform it into something that he can then use against you and explode. So it's really no different than Gambit to some degree. Like Gambit takes potential energy and turns it into kinetic energy into an object, and then he takes the object and throws it. In his case, he likes playing cards. But Glowworm is there's just no passing. Like most of these Morlocks actually could pass.
Some of the ones like that, the lady I'm calling Sleep Lady, because when we were first introduced to her,
That's Anna Lee.
She tells everybody, "You will sleep," and they do. It's an amazing power.
Well, okay, so Anna Lee,
It's like mentalism.
She could absolutely pass. She's just basically an old granny. You know what's interesting? Her power is empathy, actually. Like she can project empathy. So whatever she is feeling in that moment, she can make you feel as well. So if in the case of, and they sort of use it interestingly in this episode, because she'll use it to project fears into people. So suddenly Wolverine is scared of scorpions because he thinks there's a bunch
Even
of
if he
scorpions.
wasn't- so even if he
he's
wasn't
not
scared of
scorpions, because she finds scorpions to be
Okay,
terrifying.
so that's so fascinating. I totally misunderstood her power.
They don't really explain it, but like I know her from the comics, and I know that her power, she can project her own empathy.
So does that mean in order for someone else to feel a certain emotion, she has to first feel it in herself?
That's where it gets tricky, because if you're a writer, do you really want to pin yourself into that? Like if she happens to be sad that day, she could project sadness. But as we all know, you can't just flip a switch to like, now I'm happy. So she can't necessarily make someone feel happy if she's not happy. Like that seems like,
I find this super fascinating.
that seems like an odd power to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know that anyone's ever, obviously a writer's only going to use what helps them in their storytelling. But yeah, Anna Lee basically projects empathy.
It really changes how I see some of the scenes that utilize her, because I thought it was just simply the ability to insert some kind of experience, phobia, feeling into the other person. Sleep. That's like, it's
a
level
physical
2 spell. Like that's like,
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. But yeah, you're right. So she can probably pass.
Oh, she can definitely pass. She just looks like an old lady.
There's some folks in there who
Tar Baby, which is a really
I'm
horrible
sorry.
name. That's a horrible name.
That's a mutant.
Tar Baby's the one who is like dripping like what looks sort of like a wet cement. Like, I mean, it's tar. It's basically it's an adhesive material that comes out of his pores, and so when he's secreting it anything he touches just sticks to him. So you'll see him in the comics occasionally where it's like he's got like random papers on him because that's what his thing is. But in this episode, he uses it to create like tar-like walls that then Jean uses her psionic powers to, tear down and all that stuff. But he's unfortunately named Tarbaby.
That didn't come up in the show, but I definitely am glad it didn't. That's not great.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad. The group collectively is a like if collectively as a group this community were in the world, I was going to say the upper world,
the Eloi,
the streets,
the people, the Eloi up top. If you're going by the Time Machine references,
like I suppose they would definitely be seen and identified as mutants, and that's not, they understand that they're persecuted against. People fear them. They in fact attack the and we've got to kind of talk about this a bit because it seems as though initially they just are protecting themselves, but this was a plan for Leech to lure Cyclops and Jean Grey down to the subways.
Cyclops more than Jean Grey. Jean is collateral damage.
Yeah. But, I do find it interesting that their existence is informing or teaching the X-Men a little bit more about their situations as non-passing, for the most part, as non-passing mutants. Mm-hmm. And it gives, I think, some clarity for some of the X-Men and for the viewers too. Like, even among the group of people or the group of community members, the mutants, there are still factions. There are still kind of the haves and have-nots. There are these underprivileged groups of people that are receiving the brunt of this oppression. And a lot of that has to do not with their powers. A lot of that has to do with their exterior, with how they're perceived, what they look like.
Yeah.
And they've kind of made that into their identity. But it's also a good lesson for the X-Men around the privilege of being able to blend in with non-mutants and how that in and of itself is a power. Mm-hmm. We got to talk about the love triangle.
Well, we've got which love triangle? That's the other thing about these X-Men episodes is they always introduce one thing because they know there will be like a little subversion of it in the episode. So the beginning of the love triangle, the first love triangle we see is Wolverine and Scott and Jean. Wolverine is obviously madly in love with Jean. Jean clearly has some sort of feelings for Wolverine as well, but she and Scott are boyfriend and girlfriend.
They're clearly together.
In a committed relationship. They're, in fact, they're having a date night when Scott is ultimately kidnapped. Much to the chagrin of Wolverine.
Yeah, that conversation that Jean Grey and Scott are having before they get into the grips of the Morlocks, it's interesting because he can't really unwind. He's having a hard time calming down and having a good time on this date. And it's Jean who says, like, yeah, you have a lot of pressure. You're basically taking work home with you. And that's hard to say because they live in the
they live where they work.
But she notices that he is still focused on the job, and he's distracted by his commitments to Professor X. And she very directly points this out, and then he agrees, like, okay, I've got to just enjoy my time. Yeah.
And then there's the incident where then Leech draws the attention of the people around him. Scott instantly jumps in, not wanting to catch Leech for being a shoplifter, but wants to make sure Leech is protected from the crowd of people who are now swarming him. And And then Annalee puts Scott and Jean to sleep, and they end up hanging Jean up by a hook and chain, and sort of binding her up in the air while they reveal to Scott that the plan is that he will marry Callisto, and together they will start a family. And
they're going to be the they don't use these words, but it's like king and queen of the underground people.
Yeah.
She wants him to. There's a little bit of like Phantom of the Opera stuff happening, maybe. But sure. Now that I know about the disfigurement and like living down there and wanting Scott to be a romantic partner with her, I don't know who it is, but someone's able to disarm him. His eyes no longer have
Leech
does. Okay.
Yeah.
So he no longer has his power while he's down there.
Yeah. And part of it is it's not I mean, while it is disarming, it's more of an attractive nature, they think. They think that down here, you'll be able to use your eyes. You'll be able to see things better and be normal and one of us, but you won't have to worry about your these optic blasts that
don't you find that a little bit of
taking away his
like
power in order to make him
like we're all down here really embracing all of our flaws and mutant powers, but we're going to take yours away? Isn't that weird?
Yeah,
it does, but it's true. He is so handsome. I mean, he's already handsome, but we get to see him without his glasses, and he's just this like very
normal
handsome
dude.
Redheaded man down in the sewers.
It bothers me so much that they have chosen to go with that red color for the brown. It's like they refuse to use the color brown, but then in the same cell, his pants are brown. So why don't you just give him brown hair?
It's so interesting because Jean has red hair, and in scenes together, Jean's hair clearly red and appropriate for a redhead, right? He is kind of in between the brown and the red.
Well, they're going
so
with
I'm
the
not
whole,
sure what's happening with that, but I'm registering it as red.
Yeah, they're going with the whole like light would affect the hair color a bit, but it works if it's Superman and most of his hair is black, but there's some blue in there,
Sure.
because then you understand that that's light on the hair. It's different if in one big globulous paint stroke, you just make his whole hair color red, because now you're confusing. Now you've got two gingers going on a date together. It would never happen.
That would never happen. There's so many. That's violating so many rules of all the rules of the universe.
And you can't do it.
But I wonder, just like in real life, redheaded folks have different. There's a variety of different
shades.
Reds. Not everyone has the same.
Mine has changed over the years, but I mean,
and he's maybe getting into his older years where he
has brown hair. He has brown hair.
That's not how I register it, but I found that to be interesting. But that leads me to a question for you, because at some point they're discussing the concept of him not having his powers down there, and someone says, I think it's him. Someone says that his eyes are solar powered. Or he gets his power from the sun.
Yeah, he says that it doesn't make sense for him to be underground because his mutant power is fueled by the sun, by the sun.
I know. So I do have questions about this.
Similar to Superman.
Yeah, and so I had no idea that, like Superman, Scott gets his powers, or gets the energy for his powers, from the sun. I do know, just like Wolverine, there's lots of different comics and origins and descriptions, explanations.
There have been lots of explanations.
Someone gets their powers.
There's one I actually like a lot more than that. I don't like the idea. Yeah, I don't like the idea that Scott's power is just fueled by
solar
daylight.
energy. And I know like there has been confusion about, and I don't even know if there's confusion. We all are on the same page that these are not laser beams. This is
Not everybody is on the same page about that.
good
There
God.
are lots of people. I mean, it is it's the color red again. There is a wide misconception about what he is firing out of his eyes. His eyes are not meant to be like the beams coming out of his eyes aren't meant to be fiery, hot, or red. In very few cases should there be smoke at the end of it, because it's not like Superman's heat vision. He's not shooting laser beams. He is shooting concussive blasts out of his eyes. Now, there are going to be writers for the X-Men comics, so hey, don't at me. There are going to be writers for the X-Men comics who misinterpret it or write it incorrectly or whatever. And then suddenly it becomes canon and they're like, look, see, there was fire left over. 100% it has happened. But the idea is that what he's actually firing are concussive blasts out of his eyes. And it's one of the reasons why he can't see is because it's just this... It's basically shooting a brick wall.
Yeah.
Out of it's just a magnificent amount of power coming out of his eyes.
And at no time does it look painless and smooth.
Correct.
It always looks pretty effortful and maybe even painful. It's uncomfortable.
And
for
in
him.
many cases, it's presented, not always, again, because one might ask, how do you miss if you're shooting something out of your eyes?
Yeah.
In some cases, it is presented as he is blind in the moment that those things are, that he's firing the blast. He has no idea, like from the moment he triggers his visor or lifts his glasses, he is now hoping and praying that he hit what he was looking at a second ago.
Can I ask you this question? And this is, I'm getting lost in the sauce a little bit, but does that mean that he is always emitting this optic blast and the glasses just cover it up, or does he have the ability to?
Yeah. So if
turn it off?
In the comics, if he removes his glasses, more often than not, it will be presented as he's got to close his eyes. So for those moments, he'll be blind. You'll always see him with his eyes closed, and usually there will be like a red smoke or something just sort of emanating from, there will be something that says, oh, something's going wrong here. Like, this is not natural. The ruby lenses in his glasses and in his visor are what are keeping the power at bay.
Okay.
So without it, if he opened his eyes, he would just constantly be destroying everything around him. He has no control over it except to close his eyes. And in fact, when Rogue absorbs his power for a period of time in that Inner Magneto episode, she's like, how do you get this thing to turn off? And he says, close your eyes.
Just close your eyes.
In fact, that sort of leads to, in the comics, there was an explanation at one point that actually became my favorite, where it was about his eyes are basically a portal to another dimension to some degree. Like the power that is coming through his eyes are actually a power from another dimension seeping into our dimension. And in order to hold that back, he's got to wear the ruby lenses or close his eyes or whatever. Otherwise, all of that energy from that other dimension is just flowing into ours and creating destruction and whatever, which I think is kind of a cool idea. The idea that like, oh, I don't create portals, my eyes are portals.
His body is a portal to another universe.
Yeah, it's sort of a rip in our
so bizarre
in our fabric, and so that's kind of a cool explanation for it. But every new writer is going to come in and figure out a new way to explain the optic blasts. But that's how I've always read it, and it's how I've always liked it. I don't like it being just as derivative as Superman's heat vision.
Right.
That to me is not nearly as interesting.
Well, I think this is a good pause on my deep dive into
Scott Summers.
I'll have questions later. I'm really intrigued by his powers and his person. But we will jump back into the story, which is that we see a lot of love between Jean and Scott. Not just the fact that they're spending this intimate time together, but
There are lots of PDA out on the streets.
Yeah.
Like they're just,
you seem upset about that.
Well, I don't know. Well, maybe it's because it's Scott. It gets real awkward. Maybe it's because it's two redheads kissing each other. But yeah, they're like making out
They need
on
to
the street.
do that. Two redheads need to be behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of being upset about it, Logan is visibly irritated by their love. And as we talked about, it's because he's affectionate and cares about Jean. And I get the sense that he doesn't think they're a good pair. I get the sense that he doesn't like Scott and he doesn't think he's the right person for Jean. So this is the episode.
There's the moment when, God, I wish I got in the audio. There's a moment where Jean's like, Scott's waiting for me. And he's like, so am I.
It's so good. It's so good. Well, and this is the famous episode that contains that
photo.
Yeah, just a Wolverine looking at
him in his bunk with a framed photo.
No, so why does he have a photo?
No one knows.
Of Scott and Jean together.
No one knows. Why would you put a framed photograph of Scott and Jean on the dresser or on the nightstand next to your bed?
His room, and I know this because later in the episode, this is like kind of the way the episode ends, is that they enter his room and he's gone, but he's such a minimalist. He has a pair of dumbbells, he has a bed, he has a little nightstand, and he has a picture.
Yeah, a framed photo of just the two of them. Who gave him that photo? Did he go to the photo mart and did he steal this framed photo from their nightstand? I would get if he went into their bedroom and laid on their bed and then took the photo off their nightstand.
Does he have framed pictures of other people?
No.
Other couples? No, it's just
and certainly I didn't see any of Morph in there.
Well, it's his fault.
For someone who loves Morph so much. But no, he just has a framed photo of Scott and Jean together.
Well, not anymore because
frame.
he destroys the framed photo, and that's what they discover.
Well, he
in his
rips
room.
it in half. He rips it in half so to separate Jean and Scott, and uses his claw to puncture Scott's chest in the photo. Like he tears a little hole in there.
Yeah,
Grr.
He's not subtle.
No.
Certainly, we will understand where all of that is coming from in future episodes. At least I hope.
Yeah. But then there's the other love triangle. We were talking about the love triangles before.
Yeah.
Then there's the love triangle of Jean, Scott, and Callisto.
Right. Everyone's
Everybody wants
in their business. Everyone wants some of this.
Yeah.
Well, Callisto directly states that Scott is basically, he has two choices. He can be with Callisto romantically and co-lead the group of Morlocks, or Jean will die.
Yeah.
And luckily, Jean can take care of herself, and she gets herself out of the chains and really throws down. And that's why I said there's a lot of love in this episode, that they, there's no moment where Scott is considering this for a number of reasons, but it's clear that the reason he declines this offer is that he's in love with Jean, and there's no one can come between them.
Yeah. And even when given the opportunity, because you would think Wolverine would be like, actually, I'm kind of okay with this union. Maybe Callisto has got a point. Maybe Scott should stay down here. But no, he fights. He fights for his teammates.
There's that point where it is. Let's give Wolverine due credit. Wolverine is the one who finds Scott locked up in a room down there in the tunnels and rescues him.
Yep.
He does say, I could make a couple of ladies upset right now, or I could make a couple of ladies sad right now, but I won't do it.
Yeah.
Presumably he means Jean and Callisto.
Correct.
But that's got to be so hard to do. He really at this point is so livid and hates Scott so much, but finds himself doing the right thing, needing to save him.
Now, what's interesting too is right before that, there's a character that has disguised themselves as Scott, dead, or and Wolverine's like, great, let's chop him into pieces. Let's do that. And he walks over to him and nearly goes into him, and everyone else is like, what are you doing? And then the character, I think it's Ape, then becomes himself, like turns back into himself and runs away screaming. And Wolverine's like, Scott might be a lot of things. Like I might dislike a lot of things about Scott, but he doesn't smell like a Morlock. So from the moment that they presented the body, he knew it wasn't a Morlock. But more importantly, Wolverine has heard the term Morlock before. So he must know who these characters are. Like we are being introduced to them, and Scott and Jean are being introduced to him, but someone as tough as nails as Wolverine has clearly already dealt with them at some point in his past.
We've got to talk about how the conflict ends. It's Storm, and we've talked a little bit about this already, but Storm is the X-Men who basically says, like, we really need to deal with this head on. Callisto, you and I will end this. It almost made it seem like there was history or there was knowledge there that Storm has about the Morlocks, but basically their agreement is, without our powers, without the assistance of our teams, let's just, fight one-on-one. Yeah. And out of nowhere.
And the winner either gets Scott. Well, I guess in either case, the winner gets Scott. But Callisto is putting up her leadership of the Morlocks as collateral in this fight as well.
And out of nowhere, someone throws them lightsabers and they start to have this duel. It's very American Gladiator. It's kind of like those double-sided lightsabers, and they're basically just jousting with them.
Now, you know what's interesting?
Yeah.
This show was 6 years ahead of Phantom Menace.
That's true.
So when you see what looks like a Darth Maul double-bladed lightsaber, this show did it first.
They did it first. It looks exactly like that. It's odd because they're placing their hands not in the center, but on the side.
So it's not centered. It's not a center handle. There's like two.
Oh, okay.
On either side.
Like American Gladiators.
Yeah, the pugil sticks or whatever. Yeah.
So, needless to say, Storm beats out Callisto and
becomes leader of the Morlocks,
and says, like, why don't come, you can join the X-Men, come to the X-Mansion.
And I don't remember Xavier signing off on that. But Xavier would be
an
like,
executive decision.
Whoa, there are more people coming into the mansion that I can invasively.
He would have a field day with this new cohort of,
but then they say no. They say they don't want to go up to the top. Because they don't want to go up to the top until humanity has decided that they're acceptable in their true form, which is interesting because, again, you talk about agency. Storm says, okay, you let us know when you're ready to come up, but the invitation's there. Meanwhile, there is no mention of the fact that they've already got someone living there who does not pass in Beast. Of course, Beast is not currently living there, but yeah.
Wait, what are you saying? That they should send Beast down there?
No, they're not like, no, you don't understand. We've got people up there living there now who don't conform to society's idea of what a person should look like. We're okay with that. And we will teach you to be okay with it. And hopefully together we will teach mankind to be okay with it. Look, we've got Beast. But no one says a word about that. They just go, like, this was almost like a bluff. It was, you should come live with us. And they're like, no, we
They're
won't.
like crossing their fingers like, please don't say yes. Please don't say yes.
And then she's
We
like,
don't have space
and then
for
they're
you.
like, no, we're not coming up there. And she's like, well, when you decide to, you should just come on up. We're not going to give you the address. We're not going to give you the address.
That sounds like such a loose commitment. Like, hey, next time you're in LA, come stay with me.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Just let me know.
And then she says as well, even though I'm the leader, I'm obviously not going to stay down here with you. So I'm going to put Callisto back in charge temporarily until I come back. And you're like, I see through all of this. What are you doing? Yeah.
I don't know that it resolved anything, but I do think, again.
I mean, they got Scott back.
What? Right.
And
Right.
Jean.
They got their members back, but they didn't necessarily help or resolve the situation that the Morlocks are in.
Yeah, the Morlocks are still exactly in the same position. They're still going to have to go up top and steal from people in order to eat. They're still going to have to live in solitude away from the rest of the world. But at least they are giving them their own agency. They are telling them, we totally get where you're coming from. This is your choice to make. If this is where you want to stay, you can. But just know that there's a home up top for you if you decide that you want it.
Wink.
Yeah. Just call first.
If it's the right time. If there's space.
Make sure we're there.
If we're in town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what'd you think of this episode?
I liked it. It's the nuances. It's the understanding that the X-Men are not perfect, that they are able to kind of see and understand their own privilege and the fallacies of their lifestyles and their decisions. And again, I think Storm is a really good example in this episode of the imperfection of that existence. And she's one of those characters where her mutant power is incredible and flawless for the most part. It's not like Scott and Rogue and other folks that have to really manage themselves differently and have it almost be a vulnerability. But it's her psychological vulnerability that becomes interesting here. And I like how it's handled. It's not as if she's cured.
No.
She manages to face her fears, overcome her what she calls a phobia, but what we know is post-traumatic stress, and essentially face off with the Morlocks.
I'll be curious to see if this continues to be a thing, because we've now seen it in 2 episodes. I'm curious if the writers are going to now sort of place it aside as if she has now conquered it, or if we're going to continue to see moments where she is uncomfortable or has flashbacks.
I don't think, and my guess is that they don't think it's that simple, because already it has the nuances of this specific history of trauma that has kept coming up, and that part hasn't been resolved.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool idea. Like, maybe the claustrophobia has been resolved, but the deeper traumatic stress, that hasn't been resolved.
So you're saying
And
if
how will that come up?
Charles then has the room start closing in again, he's like waiting to see if she reacts a certain way. By the way, if the room is sort of holodeck-ish, because we see all these mechanisms coming out, these tendrils, these metallic robotic tendrils coming out, and we see laser guns shooting down on them. It's all very mechanical, and he says that the room is designed to give them the same sorts of problems that they're going to have out in the real world. But then we see, after they've destroyed all these things, because the first thing in my head is, wow, this is really expensive. They then, all those things disappear and it becomes the walls, and then the walls start closing in. So clearly it's not real. It's more projective and holographic. Why then not just give them foes? Why metallic tendrils coming out of the walls? Like, why not give them something to fight?
I think they do give them,
but they don't. Like,
simulations with enemies. They don't.
Well, not.
They've
in
done
this,
it with Sentinels,
but not in this moment. In this
okay.
moment, it's just a bunch of rando proxies of other things.
Okay, so this is like kind of sinister, but do you think that specifically Professor X was
Yes. Whatever you're saying, it's sinister. Yes. He was doing it.
Was he selectively trying to create a simulation that would provoke Storm's
That's what I'm saying.
vulnerability? Like this
That's what I'm
specifically
saying.
was
The
to
closing
challenge
in,
her.
because he says that he's going after each one based on things they might see. And in the case of Jean starts using her powers to throw laser or saw blades that are flying at her. She's able to send them off into other directions. And then she's like, you're messing with the wrong X-Men. And then another saw blade comes right at her and she's like, whoa. And she has to get out of the way. And then he starts saying, hey, you guys need to take this seriously. Stop with the one-liners and the quips. Like this is designed to be real for you. And then that's when the walls start closing in, as if to be like, Aurora, this is for you. I need you to know the walls might close in on you from time to time.
Well, and look, there are augmented reality and VR treatments that simulate threats for people with PTSD, phobias, certain anxiety disorders. They are designed to elicit an anxious response, a panic response, and they're incredibly effective. So in and of itself, that's not a bad idea. Let's use the danger room to address those unreconciled anxieties and make sure that this is handled. But again, if it is a treatment, tell the client it's a treatment.
Yeah.
In fact,
and they might know. They
provide
probably know.
that informed consent so that they're in agreement that, yes, I know that what I'm about to be immersed in, it's going to be realistic and it's designed to elicit my anxieties so that I can learn to overcome them. It's a good learning experience.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, great. So let's hold the conversation until next time, see where this goes. Drea, until then, anything you want to tell the folks where they can find you online or anything else?
Yeah, I do have a review on iTunes that I just want to read. It's from a listener of ours who gave us 5 stars, Jay Kieper. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But they say, I just found your guys' podcast. It's really awesome and insightful. I went back 10 years to begin listening to your review of each episode after watching them. I've really enjoyed them. And I love your voice, Drea, although it makes me fall asleep sometimes while listening to your podcast at night.
Same.
LOL.
Same.
Keep up the great work. Let me say a couple things. First, thank you so much for the 5 stars. We really appreciate it. And the fact that you wrote out a review is always nice. So thank you so much for that. And actually, a lot of people have mentioned they listen to the show because it helps them fall asleep. And there is something about my voice that lends itself to tiredness and a calmness. And I'm like,
well,
I've
always said you've got the NPR voice. Like that's, it's not that the content is what's making people sleepy. It's that you have a very calming, soothing effect. It's the opposite of
this feedback has
the
really,
effect I give people.
Yeah, it's really never offended me. I actually find it endearing and funny. And I've tried to change my voice and I cannot. It's just simply what I sound like. So it is what it is. But this is an opportunity, again, so thank you for this listener for the 5-star review. Please go to iTunes, check out Arkham Sessions on Apple Podcasts and give us a review. Give us some stars. We would love that. If you write us a friendly review, we might even read it on the show. Otherwise, go to my website, drdreapsychology.com, for a SpeakPipe button, and there you can leave a voice message or voice review, or find us on Instagram and in social media at Dr. Drea Psychology.
You can find me on Instagram at B_Ward028. You can also find us both on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions, and on Twitter at Arkham Sessions. And then email us arkhamsessions@gmail.com. You can also come join us on Patreon, where we will give you a shout out if you join that $5 tier. Those folks are Aaron Wenrick, Mike Ficklin, Dr. Jerome Anderson, John Henry, Antonio Lopez, Kevin Ortel, Todd Stashwick, Heroes Journey Fitness, Frank Moeller, Mark Pepper, Swara Salih, Rachel Acevedo Hoffman, Trevor Schwartz, Dr. Girlfriend, and my father, Carl Ward. Thank you all for making this episode and all of our episodes possible with your contributions to Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Arkham Sessions for your call out, and then any number of other benefits in the various tiers. You should also follow our family over at Fanbase Press and check out their news, their own podcasts, and of course their comics. They are some fantastic folks. Happy New Year to everyone on Patreon, on Twitter, on Instagram, on all those places that we named, on Discord. We love you all, and we're looking forward to 2024. Till next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.
I've gotta go. Cyclops is waiting for me.
So am I.